This week in Pure Reinvention.
You have to talk about the why of what you're doing, not the how, not the what. You get to that eventually, but you've got to start with the why piece.
Episode 83, Robin Miner-Swartz, owner, Robin Miner-Swartz, editing and consulting.
Engage, disrupt, adapt, repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Welcome to this episode of Pure Reinvention, where our mission is to create space for the unexpected by inspiring a reinvention lifestyle. I've got to tell all of our listeners, I'm so excited to be able to announce that we, this week, had our 10,000th podcast download. I got to give big kudos to Will Carlson, the man behind the scenes, for making that all happen. That's just been a tremendous accomplishment for Pure Reinvention. So thank you to all the listeners that are listening to our podcast. We're on our way to 20. I'd also like to introduce Jody Schaefer. Jody is going to be one of our co-hosts for the next 6 episodes. Jody, welcome.
Yeah, thank you.
Jody is the owner of HRM Services, a premier human resource consulting firm in the mid-Michigan area, and one of the founders of Pure Reinvention. So, Jody, you were actually the one who hooked us up with Robin.
Yeah. So I actually received an email from Robin. I didn't know her prior to that, and a mutual acquaintance of ours had set us up because Robin at that point was thinking about making a move and maybe starting her own thing. And so in this episode, you're going to hear Robin talk about that and about some of the other changes that she's made throughout her career and why she did it and sort of what her focus is. So I met with Robin, we had coffee, and she's a dynamic lady and had a lot of passion. We connected right away, and initially, it was just to sort of pick my brain as a business owner about things that I wish I would have known or things I did to prepare myself. And so she's a very thoughtful individual, but not scared of change and not scared of some of the unknowns.
This week's episode is sponsored by Willpower Consulting. Whether it be pursuing new avenues in content delivery like podcasts or developing a sustainable content building strategy, Willpower Consulting is with you every step of the way. Get a dose of willpower at WilliamRCarlson.com or at William R. Carlson on Twitter.
Robin, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
First question of the 5 steps in the Pure Reinvention process. Which step do you most connect with and why?
Connect. I consider myself to be a big fan of connection, and I love connecting people. When I went through my first career reinvention, I spent a lot of time connecting to people personally for my own needs and growth. But I now have found, moving on from there, my ability to connect other people to do great things and to make great things happen in our community is my absolute favorite thing to do.
What is your superpower?
Solving problems quickly. I think spending 17 years in a newsroom for a daily newspaper means you have to be on the balls of your feet at all times. And so I've never shifted out of that mode, even when I've moved into other careers and made other changes in my life. If there is something going wrong, or not necessarily wrong, if there is just a challenge in front of me, I want to figure out how to solve that problem very quickly.
Sure. How do I find opportunity in all this chaos?
Right.
And in the final question, when was the last time you did something outside your comfort zone?
3 years ago, my wife and I have a place up north on a lake in northern Michigan,
beautiful.
And it's gorgeous. And we live in Lansing, where there's a 5K here about every 10 minutes, and so we're used to seeing communities get together for these kinds of things. And I'm not an event planner, I'm not a race planner, but we planned a 5K for our lake, and we're in year 3, and we raised $10,000 last year for the lake community, and we're on pace to raise about $14,000 this year. So I never understood this world at all, and now it's just kind of a fun thing we do on the side in the summer.
So let's talk about this. You've alluded to, this is my first reinvention, but I think you've probably been reinventing all along. Tell us your attraction to reinvention and how you've been able to apply it.
I didn't know that reinvention was something I was going to have to experience or implement ever. When I was 11, I watched the Academy Awards, and Chariots of Fire won Best Picture that year, and I had seen it. I don't know why an 11-year-old has seen Chariots of Fire, but I had, and I liked it. And I thought, oh my gosh, if I like this movie and all these important people liked this movie, I should be a movie critic. Well, fast forward, I wound up working at the State Journal right out of college, actually while I was in college, and was a movie critic, was a restaurant critic, did all these things that I loved at the paper. But because of all this, everything I know I learned from movies, which is you retire at 65 in the newsroom because you've been there your whole life and you get a gold watch and you go on your way. And then the newspaper industry collapsed. And I had to figure out what was next for me. And I watched in 2008, 10 of my friends and colleagues in the newsroom were laid off, and it scared me to death. And I didn't want to be shown the door. I wanted to find it on my own. And so because I have a journalism background, I have no problem cold calling people and talking to strangers and asking questions. And so I started reaching out to people in the communications world in Greater Lansing and saying, can I buy you a cup of coffee? I want to hear about what you do. Not necessarily, can you find me a job? I just need to know what other jobs exist because I only know how to be a journalist. And so after buying a lot of people coffee and lunch and learning a lot of things and making a lot of great connections, I wound up speaking to Bob Colt, who is a great friend now, and he was sitting on the board at the time at the Capital Region Community Foundation, and he said, they don't have a communications person, and they really need somebody. Let me introduce you. And he played matchmaker for me, and that led to the second phase of my career. So reinvention and networking and connecting are now things I am enormous fans of.
But that is not the end of the story, is it?
No, I reinvented again. I really have enjoyed my time at the Community Foundation. I often tell people that, I worked for 17 years at the State Journal. And in the first 5 weeks at the Community Foundation, I felt like I got to know my community better than I had in the last 5 years at the newspaper. And that's simply because newspaper was cutting and cutting and cutting, and we had to be in the building doing the work, doing a lot of work, and we weren't out in the community as much. And when I got to the Community Foundation, I could spend a whole day at a nonprofit watching the work that they were doing because I was going to be telling a story about the grant that we gave to that organization. And so I really got this great sense for the community, and I'm from here originally, so I've got really deep roots and great connections in a lot of personal ways through here, but it showed me a whole segment of our community that I really didn't know anything about, and it was a powerful experience and a great experience being there. But I also knew it because I had changed jobs once that you don't die when you change jobs. It's an okay thing to change, and I knew that I wasn't going to be there for the rest of my career. So I started looking at what might be next.
So you are on your third
Career
reinvention,
3.0.
right? Which
Yes.
is you are now explained for the people who are listening to this what you do now and how to get a hold of you.
I work for myself now, which is scary and exciting and amazing and fun all at once. People have been asking me, how's it going? And I'm in week 4. So I say, I think it's going okay. I'm still learning as I'm going, but I started Miner-Swartz editing and consulting because I wanted to bring together the two areas of my expertise from my previous careers. And what I found is that journalism training that I had when I crossed over into the nonprofit world was a really valuable skill set that didn't exist in a lot of spaces in nonprofits. And so I was excited because I was able to bring value to my organization and also help other nonprofits from the very beginning, even though the career was brand new to me, because I had all this knowledge about storytelling, about how to get a message out. And so I'm marrying those two halves of my experience into this new business.
And how can people get a hold of you?
I am at robinminerswartz.com and robinminerswartz@gmail.com, and it talks about the services that I offer there. And a lot of it is I love doing things a lot of people roll their eyes at. AP style, copy editing, proofreading.
Yeah, as I'm rolling my eyes.
Yes, I really, really enjoy those things. And turns out not a ton of people do. So that's something that I'm excited to be able to offer, but also editorial project management. And I'm the managing editor of Central Michigan's Alumni Magazine, those kinds of projects that people always know they have to have an annual report or a publication of some kind, but they really don't know how to wrap their arms around getting it done.
So, Robin, one of the things that you have been explaining to me today is the importance of community and connecting. I want to take two experiences you've had. One at the Community Foundation, in which you really were able to understand the value of growing, connecting, building community, and your experience with a business that was cutting. And the differences that you observed when a business decides to cut its way into prosperity, or whether it chooses to connect its way into prosperity. Can you explain what you were able to observe?
What I was able to observe was that I was really glad I was able to make the change when I did, because I have a lot of friends who stayed through the big cuts, the really deep cuts and the big changes in the newsroom. And I honestly don't know if I could have weathered it the way that they did, and which is one of the big reasons that I chose to go elsewhere. But what it taught me was you can do more with less if you're nimble. And that leads to me being a big fan of problem solving. I think because I had to solve so many of those problems, it really empowered me going into my new world to be able to say, here are all the things I can do. And you have a lot of capacity in one person, and I can bring a lot of value to the table because I learned how to be nimble like that. I always like to tell people, if you can be a utility player in your office, you are a really valuable person. You should be really great at the thing they brought you in for, but it helps if you're good at some other things on the side, or at the very least willing to learn and willing to try new things. Especially when I talk to college students who are looking at internships or even things they're doing in school where they are paying to learn, I always tell people, once you have a job, they are paying you to learn. They are paying you to do this job. And so take those opportunities to learn whatever you can, because your next job, you may really need that new skill that they taught you in your previous job.
Right. So that disruption for you individually caused you to accelerate to the next level.
Exactly.
But what did it do to their community? What did it do in terms of building robustness, in terms of being able to really go outbound and connect at the next level?
I think it really caused them to examine their role in the community, and now I see them a lot more visibly than I ever remember us being when I was at the paper. They make an effort to do a lot of events where they're saying, come out and meet the editors, meet the writers. They're hosting things. They're doing storytelling events.
What you're explaining is they're reinventing. It has forced them to reinvent.
For sure. You would have to. I mean, especially in that industry, in the news industry, you've got to figure out how to reinvent, or you're just going to get passed by.
So the first job was a kind of a constriction, which caused a reinvention through a disruption. The second job was growth and connecting. What would be the right way to talk about a foundation? Through the investment that the foundation was willing to make in the community to grow?
Yeah, I mean, I think I joked a lot that, I was a journalist who covered movies and restaurants, so everybody wanted to talk to me. But there are a lot of journalists who people don't want to talk to in the community. And then when you go to the Community Foundation, where you walk around with a giant novelty check, everybody wants to talk to you. So people are generally very welcoming of funders in any situation. But it was beyond that. I mean, there was just such a genuineness in all of these organizations that I got to connect with, and they want to get their story out there. They want help sharing their stories. And so many of these nonprofits don't have a communications person on staff, or don't have the time to invest in figuring out how to be telling their story. They're trying to save their part of the world. And so for me to have the time as a funder to go in and help them with that piece of it was just a tremendous experience. It helped the foundation grow its own storytelling, and it helped these organizations better tell their stories.
So you've alluded to storytelling on a number of occasions, and so I want to come back to that. You talked about how a disruption and a constriction of a business forced you to enhance your level of capacity and be a utility player, learn how to do many new things. There are also those individuals who can't do that and are casualties to that kind of a process. In your second project as the Community Foundation, everybody wanted to be your friend. Explain to me how important it is to have a unique ask, to have a unique fit, to have a unique skill set as the attraction rather than money. Isn't that where the basis of storytelling really comes from, is having a reason to tell the story?
Right.
and trying to figure out what is your unique story?
Yeah. And I think as people who are, I mean, this is true beyond the nonprofit world, but in the nonprofit world, people speak in jargon and acronyms and a lot of internal,
It's very confusing.
Oh, it is. I mean, it took me a year at the Community Foundation before I could unpack what all of that stuff meant. And I had so many notes explaining.
And every industry
and
has their own jargon
yeah.
that takes a long time to sort through.
What I started telling people was, how do you explain to your mom what you do? How do you tell your mother what your job is or what that cool thing is that you did today? I'm pretty sure you don't use all those acronyms when you talk to your mom about it. And if you can start to think about things in that way, your story becomes unique. It becomes about the people you're serving, about the work you're doing, and not about the dollars and the grants and the convening and the partnerships and all of these buzzwords that you hear floating around in the nonprofit world. And it becomes about the people. And that's what it needs to be about.
And so I'm hearing you say, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm hearing you say in reinvention, we have to understand what our story is.
Absolutely.
And that's true whether we're an individual going through reinvention or a business going through reinvention.
Absolutely. It's even more true for a business, I think, than it is for a person.
Well, certainly more complicated, and takes someone like yourself who probably has a really good understanding of professional reinvention as an individual to then be able to project that into what that means to a company.
For sure.
So what is your advice to a company that's going through reinvention and they need to start storytelling in a different way?
My absolute favorite talk to point people to is Simon Sinek's TED Talk about Start With Why, because he really distills that message in a way that makes sense for a lot of folks. We had our board watch that TED Talk at a board meeting about a year ago, and it really hit home for them. You have to talk about the why of what you're doing, not the how, not the what. You get to that eventually, but you've got to start with the why piece of why you're here. Why are you different from everyone else? And if you're not different, why are you here? And that piece of it, and changing the way you approach telling your story from here's a list of numbers to show you the success that we've had in this past year. I don't know who the people are behind those numbers or what work went into getting those numbers where they are. And so you really need to bring those people into the picture. When I started at the Community Foundation in 2010, the annual report was a publication that listed all of the grants and all of the gifts that they had received. And this is not true of just this community foundation. This was true everywhere in the country. That's what an annual report was. And when I came in, I said, that I don't want to read that. I want to read about what is happening because of these dollars. And so I changed it into a magazine about the Community Foundation and told the stories of the grantees, but also the donors who were making it possible. And that was something, my timing was really good because it was just starting to happen in all these other places too. And now that is the norm for these kinds of annual reports. There's a page in there with financials because that's important to include as well. But you need to tell the story behind the numbers.
Robin Miner-Swartz, telling the story and living reinvention. Thank you, Robin.
Thank you so much, Mike.
Jody, one of the things that I was really inspired by listening to Robin's comments was her superpower being she's a connector.
Yeah.
And being a connector myself, I really appreciate that as a skill.
Yeah, we always ask that question of our guests, and the connection makes so much sense with Robin's story, right? And the fact that she is a storyteller. So one of the things that I really liked about what she was talking about is that this idea that people sometimes tell what they do, and her role and her business really is positioned to help them translate the what into the why or the impact so that it really motivates behavior. And I think that's key for all of us, regardless of industry.
Robin has, as part of her description of her business, that she's a storyteller. My question for people who are listening to this is, how many of you really feel that part of your role is as a storyteller, which, as Jody, you just described, it helps people understand the why?
Yeah.
And Robin said right up front, my job is to help people understand the why. And then, of course, she does that through the ability to tell the story.
And she did that when she was a reporter. The idea was to motivate behavior. And then when she went to work for the Community Foundation, same thing, motivate behavior, motivate the donations. And now certainly in her own business, motivate people to do something on behalf of her clients.
Well, and as you get to be good at storytelling, you also then are able to do what also I heard Robin talk about, which is to be in a constant reinvention mode.
Yeah.
So that your story, not that it changes, but it is your journey. And as you learn and as you grow and as you adapt, you have the ability to modify and adjust your story to be connecting and real for every person or every business you're interacting with. And I think that is so key.
The how you service them may change. And we've heard other guests talk about that, how they had to change their business model because the needs of the market changed. But the why you do it should be so central and so core to who you are that the story itself, if it's focused on the why, doesn't change as dramatically.
So for those of you who are listening to this and thinking, do I really understand what my story is or what I need to do to stay relevant?
Yep.
I think that the answer, as Robin described it, is in the story and making sure that the story is really what connects you to whoever your customer is or whoever's on the other side of the table.
The story has to be so stripped down. I mean, that's another thing she talked about, free of jargon. In other words, how would you explain to your mom what you do? I love that concept. So it has to be kind of bare, at the essence of who you are so that everybody, even those not in your industry, can connect to it.
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jody.
Yeah.
Remember, if you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it pure reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter at Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.